Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Facebook messages used by pro-Brexit campaigners during the 2016 referendum have been published for the first time by a parliamentary committee examining the prevalence of fake news. They provide a real insight into the micro-targeted approach aimed at specific groups of voters. Their most prevalent form, simple graphic pop-ups inviting you to click your response. Turkey's 76 million people are joining the EU. Good news? Rising immigration is a constant theme, with references to other states wanting to join the EU, straining resources. And look at this for an example of geographic micro-targeting, promising the rechanneling of EU membership costs to local projects. Presumably, Facebook subscribers with a history of supporting animal welfare causes would have been treated to this, an evocative image implying the EU does not do enough to regulate bullfighting. Ed Hauker has more details.
All this year, Channel 4 News has been following the rise of digital data and dirty tricks in our democracy and others across the globe. This week, analysts claim Facebook was still reeling from the Cambridge Analytica scandal, yesterday suffering the biggest one-day loss in US stock market history. But on this side of the Atlantic, a new insight from the firm offered to MPs and revealing for the first time how Brexit campaigners used Facebook in the 2016 referendum. Now, finally, released by Facebook 2 years after the referendum, the details of the ads distributed for these campaigns by the Canadian data company Aggregate IQ. AIQ struck it rich in the referendum. Around 40% of VoteLeave's funds ended up with them, and AIQ received yet more money from the DUP and more still from VoteLeave. Dominic Cummings, VoteLeave's overall leader and strategist, said the Facebook ads were crucial.
We held back almost all of our budget, and then we basically dumped the entire budget in the last 10 days and really in the last 3 or 4 days. And we aimed it at, I can't remember exactly, but I think roughly about 7 million people. Saw something like, I think, 1.5 billion digital ads.
And what did these ads say? Well, there was the notorious £350 million message and claims about the NHS. But there was something else too. Channel 4 News has calculated that more than 45% of the messages distributed online by VoteLeave were about threats posed by immigration. Some of the claims were called wild, a misrepresentation of the true cost of EU membership, for example. Some turned out to be wildlife. Brexit to protect the polar bears.
What we have to understand is that this was over 2 years ago, and things have clearly already moved on significantly since then. So, we're already playing catch up. And if we don't start to recognise the problems and the gaps that exist currently within the laws, then we're never going to catch up.
But what happened in the final weekend of the campaign? On Thursday, the 16th of June, Labour MP Jo Cox was murdered in her constituency, and after that, VoteLeave said they suspended national campaigning until the 19th. But now there are questions about what the campaign VoteLeave did on Friday, the 17th of June. And we can reveal evidence of a private online discussion between VoteLeave volunteers Shamir Sani and Darren Grimes and AIQ's head Zach Massingham. On that Friday night, Massingham told them,
"Avoiding the hard stuff and favouring softer over the weekend, which favours well for all of your stuff."
And this ad, created the day after Cox's death, received between 290,000 and 700,000 Facebook impressions. This one, created the same day, between 5.4 million and 12.1 million impressions.
Officially, both of the campaigns and the political parties suspended campaigning. I remember it very well in the aftermath of Joe's murder. But the fact that this still went on in an unregulated sphere, I think shows you how unprincipled these groups were. And although it may not have been illegal, it's certainly immoral, and I think tells a lot about some of the people who were behind this campaign.
VoteLeave say they suspended all online advertising, and Aggregate IQ say they paused VoteLeave's online advertising in the days after Joe Cox's death. At the time of broadcast, we had not heard from Darren Grimes of Believe. Tonight, Dominic Cummings, seen here celebrating victory, leaked a major parliamentary report into fake news, describing the MPs behind it as charlatans. Due out this weekend, it's expected to say that democracy is under threat unless the government takes action to tackle manipulation and disinformation.
Well, we did ask Facebook for an interview tonight, but no one was available. Earlier, I spoke to Damian Collins, the Conservative chair of the Digital Culture, Media and Sport Committee, who is leading the parliamentary inquiry into fake news. And I began by asking him if these micro-targeted ads break any laws or regulations.
Well, people can draw their own view as to the substance of the ads, the claims that they make within it. People might be surprised that some of these ads that will run as part of the campaign don't have any markings on, don't tell you who the people running the campaign is, and that's one of the things that we think needs to change about the way political advertising works. And I think the balance of messaging certainly shows you just how much weight was put on the fears of immigration as part of VoteLeave's campaign.
Had they been leaflets, would they have broken the law rather than digital ads?
Well, this is it. Leaflets require an imprint, so you know which campaign it's come from. That's not a requirement on ads run on Facebook at the moment, and we think that's something that needs to change. And indeed, in some of these ads, you can see there are ads that don't identify who the advertiser is.
When you say, people don't know where these ads were coming from, a lot of the VoteLeave campaigners have been saying that's nonsense because these ads would have been boxed within a VoteLeave box. So there would have been no doubt as to where they were coming from.
The issue we've been looking at with a lot of political advertising is whether it's transparent or not. So people looking at the ads as we've received them from Facebook would see some of them are clearly marked, some of them aren't. Now, if they were presented as clearly from VoteLeave in another way, that's fine. But if they weren't, I think that's a problem. The
VoteLeave campaigners are saying, you're just a Remainer, you're partisan. Why haven't you given the same scrutiny to the Remain campaign? Have you asked for the Remain ads as well?
Well, we're not running an investigation into the referendum campaign and the way it was conducted. What we've been looking at is the way in which information and news is disseminated online, the crucial role that data plays within that. And as a consequence of evidence we've received, we've taken an interest in particular Cambridge Analytica and companies like AIQ that have worked heavily with them to understand the way in which they use data and the way they ran advertising targeting as part of their work. But if people came to us with evidence of similar concerns about data usage by any company, then we would have looked at that during the campaign as well.
The man who refused to give evidence to your committee, Dominic Cummings, has actually published your report days before you were due to publish it. And he's levelled many accusations against you personally of incompetence, of furthering lies, of being one-sided, of essentially just being a Remainer with an agenda. What's your response to what he said?
Well, firstly, we gave Dominic Cummings an opportunity to come in front of the committee so that he could put his side of the story. Now, we often made that opportunity was given to people like Aaron Banks, and it was given to people like Alexander Nix from Cambridge Analytica as well. Now, he refused to do that, and I think if he'd come in front of the committee, then he could have sought to answer our questions and put his side of the story, but he chose not to do that. I think he's behaved in general in a way which is completely contemptuous of Parliament and of the work of a parliamentary committee, and his decision to leak the report also demonstrates his total contempt for the work of Parliament and parliamentary committees as well.
Do you understand if voters are watching this and are getting a bit confused and saying, well, what does all this add up to? Do you ultimately, as someone who spent a long time looking at this, feel that the referendum campaign result is now unsafe?
Well, there will always be many factors at play in that, and I don't think actually that's the way we should look at it. What I want to do through our inquiries, we've been concerned about the way disinformation and misinformation can spread in news and in politics. particularly through social media. And I think people have a right to know that these things are happening. This is not about one election. It's about interference probably in lots of elections, some of it done by foreign actors like the Russians, some of it done by consultancies that work in this space. I think we have been largely unaware of the sophistication of some of the techniques, unaware of how our data can be taken from us and used to target us in political campaigns. And I think people have a right to know. And what I want to do is lay out what we've discovered, what we've found, and invite comment based on that, because my big concern is that our institutions, the Electoral Commission and other institutions that are designed to protect the way our elections are fought in this country, are working on outdated rules and regulations. That technology has changed this substantially. And we need to understand how it's changed it, and we need to design new rules to make sure we've got confidence that our democracy is safe.
Damien Collins, thank you very much. So once again, Facebook at the heart of a political controversy, and Facebook has taken a massive hit on the stock market. I'm joined now from Charlottesville, Virginia, by Siva Vaidyanathan, media professor and author of Anti-Social Media, How Facebook Disconnects Us and Undermines Democracy. How much of the Facebook scandals about data scraping and all of that had to do with what's going on to the Facebook price?
Only indirectly. So several months ago, Mark Zuckerberg and many other top executives at Facebook predicted that there would be a slight slowdown in the growth of Facebook usage and a reduction in the rate of increase of revenue and profit, largely because they were building in systems to try to limit so many of the terrible things that have resulted from Facebook's use around the world. Things like the spread of hate speech and calls to genocide and harassment of women and minorities, and all sorts of things that you might call part of the authoritarian or nationalist toolkit that we see in places like Myanmar and the Philippines and even India, right? So because there is finally widespread concern about those sorts of terrible activities that people have been able to use Facebook for, Facebook has been trying to cope. As a result, it predicted and announced that things wouldn't grow quite as fast as they used to. But look, they used to grow at an incredible rate. In yesterday's report, Facebook announced that profits were actually 31% above 2017, the same quarter of 2017.
So do you think
revenue was 42% above the same quarter of 2017? So there's nothing wrong with Facebook as a business.
So do you think the only thing that will
affect the price?
Sorry to butt in. We're just short of time. So do you think ultimately the market will be able to respond to these Facebook scandals and control Facebook, or will it have to be some sort of political intervention if anybody is to get a grip on this business?
I think it would be a mistake to think that because the value of the stock went down, there is some sort of market response or effective market response to the problems of Facebook. In fact, the stock market, the stock price will recover very quickly as institutional investors look at the basics and see that Facebook is growing, Facebook is making more money every quarter. 2.2 billion people are using Facebook. People are not quitting by the millions by any means. In fact, it's growing constantly in places like India and Kenya and Nigeria and South Africa and Brazil, places where growth really matters, where the future, the 21st century, will be executed in those places, not in Western Europe, not in North America. So investors are going to get that for the long run, Facebook is actually incredibly powerful, almost impossible to topple. The only way we will address the problems that Facebook causes in the world is to do so politically, to mount stronger policies, more competition interventions, right, to make sure that Facebook is not as powerful as it has been.
Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Siva Vaidyanathan.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Now, Aaron Banks, the man who funded the Leave.eu campaign, has said he gave a sworn statement to the South African police last year, arising from a dispute with his former business partner, Chris Kimber. Last night, this programme broadcast some of Mr. Kimber's allegations about Mr. Banks and his diamond mines, including a statement in which he said Mr. Banks was yet to go under oath in any forum. Mr. Banks told us today he had given a sworn affidavit to police. We again invited Aaron Banks to come on Channel 4 News and answer questions about his business activities and how he funded his Brexit campaign donations. He again declined. Well, if Brexit is taxing the Labour Party, it's certainly troubling the Prime Minister, who is touring European capitals to try and sell her customs plan. With lots of Brexit activity today, we've condensed what you need to know into our Brexit Minute.
The hills are alive with the sound of music.
Is it the sound of grinding teeth? After Barnier squished her Chequers plan yesterday, the PM was in Salzburg trying to go over his head, talking to the Austrian leader who holds the EU presidency about his favourite things. She might need more than Edelweiss to charm him. Back in Blighty, Brexiteer MPs like Priti Patel are trying to raise money for one of their young musketeers, Darren Grimes, who was fined £20,000 by the Electoral Commission for breaking the law in the referendum.
I'm not a rich person. I honestly don't know how I'm going to pay for this fine. But more importantly, I don't want the Commission to get away with this.
But are those rushing to undermine the Electoral Commission breaking the MP's Code of Conduct, which says they should uphold the law? In London, Mayor Khan said Brexit was going to undermine police cooperation across Europe, meaning more cocaine flooding into London. And that, kids, is a bad thing. There are 245 days to Brexit.
We are facing nothing less than a crisis in our democracy. That's the stark warning tonight from MPs who've investigated the effect of fake news and social media on the democratic mechanisms of our nation. The conclusions to a report by the Commons Committee on Digital, Culture, Media and Sport were intended to be published on Sunday, but were leaked today by Dominic Cummins, the mastermind of the VoteLeave campaign in the 2016 referendum. The committee blasts technology firms like Facebook, Twitter and Google for failing to prevent fake news and the organised mining of data. The MPs make a series of recommendations in their report. Amongst their proposed changes, they argue that all political campaign material should include information on the organisation who published it. They call for the Electoral Commission to be given the power to impose higher fines than the existing £20,000 for breaches of electoral law. And they want social networks to be forced to be legally responsible for harmful and illegal material on their platforms. Well, we did ask the Electoral Commission to join us tonight, but nobody was available. The bulk of the committee's criticism of social media companies falls on Facebook. Nobody was available from there either. We're joined, though, tonight by Divya Narendra, who's a Harvard contemporary of Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg, and reached a settlement with Facebook in a dispute over the origins of the platform, dramatised in the film The Social Network. Also with us is Chris Wiley. He's a former employee of Cambridge Analytica who blew the whistle earlier this year on the firm's activities. Good evening to you both. Divya, if I can start with you. You saw the very early workings of Facebook. You saw its exponential rise. I wonder if you think that Facebook should have thought about ethical questions earlier, or were they just too carried away by their early phenomenal success?
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's a little hard to appreciate the scale of the business and sort of the rate of growth of the company over the last decade. I don't think it's an issue of them not necessarily thinking about ethical issues. I think the issues are actually somewhat complicated, and there's a lot of debate and I think healthy debate around what Facebook's responsibility is as a moderator of this tremendous flow of content that's hitting all of their platforms, which includes Instagram, WhatsApp, Messenger, and obviously core Facebook.
But it was extraordinary power. It was extraordinary power for a long time without responsibility.
I totally disagree. I mean, I think at the end of the day, this is a platform with 2.5 billion users across the globe, and playing that sort of policeman over that large an audience is not something that should be taken lightly or should be, let's just say, haphazardly policed. And I think,
yeah, but the trouble was it was haphazard. That's the problem, isn't it? And in this report tonight by MPs, actually, it says that voters were systematically manipulated by tech giants acting irresponsibly over data collection, for example. That actually what happened was that Facebook's growth was so extraordinary that it didn't have the mechanisms in place to have proper policing.
I think that's totally right. That they weren't. I mean, look, I think for any company in growth mode, playing policeman is not first priority. But I think the reaction has been fairly quick. I mean, like what they've done is over the last couple of months, post Cambridge Analytica, not only have they, hired thousands of people, now at over 30,000 employees, but they've made it much more difficult for third-party apps to access data that, could arguably be manipulated or used in some sort of nefarious manner. But again, even with all of those actions, I think ultimately society needs to make a decision or at least think hard about, what level of moderation is appropriate while still allowing for sort of a healthy debate and discourse on the platform. And I think that debate is definitely one that we should be having.
Yes, but what this committee is calling for is new laws to make platforms accountable for content on their sites. And for example, moving away from Cambridge Analytica at the moment, one of the examples given was Facebook's apparent failures to stop inciting of hatred against Rohingya Muslims in Burma. So it's not necessarily just about, who wins what election. It's about the breadth of the content, which is obviously with 2.5 billion users, you've got to have a huge breadth of content. And is it possible? Yeah. Is it possible to police such instances of hatred?
So I think that there should be some parallel between laws around hate speech and how social media platforms, filter content that's being posted on the platform. Yeah. So. It's very fair, I think, to say to Facebook, look, you have to uphold certain standards that, would otherwise be upheld through, standard channels like, typically, laws or other sort of, legislation that would be passed by governments. But what I don't think we want is a huge disconnect in terms of Facebook being held to, let's say, a higher standard than, other media companies or other venues for discussion. And I think as long as there's consistency there, that's probably a good thing.
Well, thank you.
While at the same time, yeah.
Thank you. Let me just bring in Chris Wiley. Thank you very much for that. Let me just bring in Chris Wiley now. I mean, this would not have come about, Chris Wiley, if you had not blown the whistle on what was happening, particularly with Cambridge Analytica. But do you feel vindicated in the broader examination of the tech giants?
For me, it's not so much about vindication. It's so that, I blew the whistle so that people actually could start to learn about some of the things that companies like Facebook were allowing to happen on their platform. It should be pointed out that Facebook knew about Cambridge Analytica for years before I came out and The Guardian, published all of these stories and did nothing about it. So, the point, the gentleman,
that I can't substantiate, and that is an allegation.
Well, it's been substantiated in The Guardian and the New York Times. If you actually read the articles, I was sent legal correspondence from Facebook in 2016. That's a fact. I've given that to The Guardian. The Guardian's written about it. The New York Times has written about it. The point that I'm making is that even when a platform like Facebook does know about something, if it creates a PR issue, it doesn't do anything about it.
But what do you think now about DCMS then? Because DCMS are making some quite substantial recommendations that actually there should be a legal responsibility for harmful and illegal content on sites.
Absolutely, because there's, every single person has, legal obligations not to harm people, right? So, if I go and I shout out hate speech, that's against the law. And so it follows from that if you are a platform that is facilitating that is facilitating and making money off of disinformation or hate speech, that you should be held accountable for that. And it's absolutely outrageous that Facebook continuously refuses to ban sites like InfoWars, which is absolutely provably false information. A site that alleges that Hillary Clinton has a pedophile ring, a site that alleges that NASA has a slave colony on Mars, right? These are provably untrue things, and Facebook consistently refuses to ban sites like InfoWars.
So we're not talking just about Facebook, and I think it's interesting because Facebook, of course, have had a bit of torrid week this week with a fifth of their value being wiped anyway. But we're talking about all sorts of different tech giants. We're talking about Google. We're actually talking about Instagram, obviously, which is obviously owned by Facebook and so forth, and Twitter. Sure. All these different companies. But on that whole question, of, for example, data being mined, which you showed was happening. What we're still not able to prove, and I don't think you could ever prove it, is that it actually swung an election, swung a referendum. But what you're presumably saying is for the future, you want to make sure that everything is open, fair, and honest.
Well, I mean, this gets to really the elephant in the room, particularly for Britain, which is that, Facebook facilitated illegal campaigning on the part of VoteLeave, which allowed them to cheat.
Well, that's an
and
allegation
win the
as well.
Referendum. Well, no, it's not an allegation, because actually, if you look at the Electoral Commission and the ICO reports, the VoteLeave has been, found to have committed unlawful acts, that where that money went onto Facebook ads, right? Facebook facilitated cheating in the referendum.
Well, let's just say that that's an allegation you're also making. I want to make the broader point.
Well, these aren't allegations. Every time I come on to BBC, I always get stopped by saying these are allegations. We need to wait for a report. When the report comes out, the Electoral Commission found that VoteLeave broke the law. That's a fact.
Yes.
VoteLeave broke the law. That's a fact. That's not an allegation. Okay. Facebook facilitated that because they allowed these ads to go onto their platform using money that was unlawful.
Well, let me talk to you about a broader point from someone that actually knows tech before we finish. With the new privacy laws, the GDPR, interestingly, Facebook lost 1 million users in Europe. And I wonder more broadly, I'm not making an accusation here about Facebook, I'm wondering if people growing up with tech as it were, part of their DNA, are now taking back their privacy, are now thinking more, are thinking more deeply about what they want to be known in the world about themselves.
I can comment on that. I mean, there's no question that GDPR is going to be, a watershed moment for technology companies the world over, far beyond just Facebook. But I think the one thing that we also have to recognize about social media is that when people post information on social media, they're using the platform to promote themselves, to promote, experiences that they've had, and to share information. So I wouldn't read too much into the fact that there was a blip in sort of the European, monthly active user count on Facebook. I mean, I think the fact that despite all of the media hoopla and sort of focus on Cambridge Analytica, even despite that, the fact is that Facebook and other social media platforms are still growing. It's not like social media is losing its appeal overnight because of Cambridge Analytica. So I think the important thing is that people are now hopefully maybe a little bit more careful about how they use social media. But I think overall, the obsession with Cambridge Analytica is a little bit overblown. At least, when I talk to my friends and people, at least I interact with on a daily basis.
Well,
they don't see.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we've run right out of time. Thank you both for coming in tonight.